The alarms on my console scream before I even understand what they mean. Red light floods the bridge of the horizon, and every officer around me freezes for half a second, the way people do when the worst news arrives faster than their minds can catch up. I am Daniel Cross, Fleet Commander of Earth's Outer Defense Wing, and the numbers on my screen tell me that an unidentified battle group has crossed into our colony space near the Kepler outpost. No warning, no message, just ships, appearing out of the dark like they own it. Grace Holt, my second in command, reads the same numbers, and her voice is tight. She asks how a fleet that size got so close without a single sensor buoy catching them earlier. I do not have an answer yet. What I do have is a memory, sharp and sudden, of every warning our intelligence officers gave us for the past 2 years. Warnings that the Galactic Council had labeled Earth's territory as unclaimed. Warnings that other species were watching our silence and calling it weakness. For 20 years, Earth never sent a single representative to the Galactic Summit. Not once. While 100 worlds argued over trade routes and border lines and ancient treaties, our seat at that table stayed empty. The Council mocked us for it in public broadcasts, calling us the vanished species, the ones too afraid or too primitive to take part in the affairs of the galaxy. What they never understood was that our silence was never fear, it was patience. After the Great Collapse, when Earth nearly lost everything to a war most of the galaxy still does not know about, our leaders made a choice. We would not beg for protection from strangers who saw us as small and fragile. We would rebuild quietly, in the dark, far from prying eyes, until the day we no longer needed anyone's permission to matter. That day, it seems, has arrived far sooner than any of us expected. Fort Peter Lang, the youngest officer on my bridge crew, leans toward me with a question in his eyes that he is too disciplined to ask out loud. I answer it anyway. Yes, I tell him, this is real. Yes, we are going to respond. And no, we are not going to wait for the Council to decide if Earth deserves defending. The unidentified fleet outside Kepler belongs to a species called the Vantor, a proud and expanding people who have spent the last decade absorbing smaller, undefended systems along the edge of known space. They do this quietly, always timed to moments when a world looks weak, distracted, or forgotten, and Earth, according to every galactic record, is exactly that, forgotten. What the Vantor do not know is that we have been watching them as closely as they have been watching us. I open a channel to Fleet Command back on Earth, and the voice that answers belongs to Admiral Henry Voss, the one man who has spent the last 2 decades preparing for a moment exactly like this one. His tone is calm, almost eerily so, when he tells me that Kepler is not an accident, it is a test. The Vantor want to see if Earth will defend a colony that the rest of the galaxy has never even acknowledged exists. If we do nothing, we lose Kepler, and worse, we confirm every rumor that Earth is finished, broken, easy to take. If we respond, we reveal capabilities that no other species has ever seen. For years, our engineers have built ships using technology recovered from the ruins of the war that nearly destroyed us. Ships faster, stronger, and far more dangerous than anything currently sailing the summit's approved battle registries. Admiral Voss gives me the order clearly. Hold your position. Do not engage yet, let them commit further. I do not like it. Every instinct in me wants to move the moment I see innocent lives at risk. But I trust the plan more than I trust my instincts, because the plan has been 20 years in the making, and my instincts have been active for exactly 4 minutes. On the display, the Vantor fleet begins to descend toward Kepler's upper atmosphere. Their formation is confident, almost lazy, the posture of a species who has done this 100 times and never once been punished for it. Grace Holt watches with me, her jaw tight, her hands steady on the controls despite the tension radiating off her. She asks me quietly if we are really going to let them land troops before we move. I tell her the truth. Yes. Because the moment they land, they become trespassers under every law the Galactic Council claims to enforce. And Earth, for the first time in 20 years, is about to use those very same laws against the people who wrote them. The silence stretches as the Vantor ships continue their descent. Peter Lang counts down the altitude out loud, his voice cracking slightly with nerves he is trying hard to hide. I place a hand briefly on his shoulder, not because he needs comfort, but because I need the reminder that these are still people beside me, not just numbers on a screen. Then the moment comes. The Vantor ships breach the lower atmosphere, and Grace Holt receives the confirmation from Admiral Voss himself. Engage. The Horizon and its escort ships move as one, and for the first time in 20 years, Earth openly uses force outside its own solar system. What happens next is fast, precise, and far less violent than the Vantor expected, because our goal is not destruction. It is disabling their ships just enough to force a retreat without triggering the kind of galactic incident that could be twisted into propaganda against us. Within 11 minutes, the Vantor fleet withdraws, damaged, confused, and utterly unprepared for what they just witnessed. They came expecting an empty, undefended colony. They leave having encountered a species they assumed had vanished from the galaxy entirely. I sit back in my chair as the tension in the bridge slowly drains into something quieter, something closer to disbelief. Grace Holt exhales for what feels like the first time in 10 minutes. Peter Lang looks at me and asks the question everyone on that bridge is thinking. What happens now? I do not know the full answer yet, but I know this. The Council will hear about Kepler within hours. They will demand explanations, accusations will fly, and Earth's long silence will finally break in a way no one expected. We did not attend a single summit in 20 years, but our absence was never surrender. It was preparation. Back on Earth, Admiral Voss watches the same reports I do, and his voice carries a weight I have never heard from him before when he speaks to the assembled fleet command. The Vantor test was only the beginning, he says. Word will spread. Other species will grow curious, then nervous, then afraid. And soon, the Council that once left an empty chair for humanity will demand we finally take our seat. I ask him what our answer will be. His response is short, and somehow it settles every doubt still lingering in my chest. Our answer, Commander Cross, will not be words. It will be a fleet, unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen, arriving exactly when they least expect it. I look out at the stars beyond the viewport, calm now, deceptively peaceful, and I understand for the first time just how close we are to a moment that will change everything. Earth ignored every summit, every accusation, every insult thrown at our empty chair, but the silence is ending, and what comes next will not be quiet at all. As the Horizon begins its return course toward Earth, I feel something shift inside me, a mixture of pride and unease that I cannot quite separate. We have spent 2 decades hiding our strength behind silence, letting the galaxy believe we were weak, forgotten, irrelevant. That illusion just cracked over the skies of Kepler, and cracks, once they start, do not close on their own. Grace Holt breaks the silence beside me, her voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. She says that for 20 years she believed Earth's silence was shame. Now she wonders if it was the most patient kind of strength she has ever witnessed. I do not answer right away. Instead, I think about Admiral Voss's words, about a fleet unlike anything the galaxy has seen, and about the empty chair that has waited at every summit table for 2 decades. Somewhere out there, across 100 worlds, word of Kepler is already spreading, and with it, questions no one in the galaxy is prepared to answer. What is Earth? What have they been building, and why, after 20 years of silence, did they finally choose now to speak? I do not have those answers yet. But I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my chest, that we are about to give the entire galaxy an answer it will never forget. The message arrives exactly 3 days after Kepler, and it comes through every channel Earth has ever used to speak with the galaxy at once. No quiet diplomatic request this time, no polite invitation buried in bureaucratic language. This is a broadcast meant to be seen by every colony, every ship, every citizen of Earth at the same moment, and the voice delivering it belongs to a council speaker I have never heard address humanity directly before. I am standing in the command center beneath Fleet Headquarters when the broadcast plays, surrounded by officers who go still the moment the speaker's voice fills the room. The message is simple, cold, and impossible to misunderstand. Earth has ignored every summit for 20 years. Earth has now used unregistered military force against a recognized galactic species. Earth will appear before the Council within 7 days to explain itself, or Earth will be formally declared a rogue territory, stripped of any protection under galactic law, and left open to claim by any species willing to take it. The room stays silent for a long moment after the broadcast ends. Grace Holt is the first to speak, her voice low, almost disbelieving. She asks if the Council actually expects us to walk into their chamber and apologize for defending our own people. Admiral Henry Voss stands at the head of the room, and when he finally speaks, his voice carries none of the panic I expected. Instead, there is something almost like relief in his tone, as if this exact moment is one he has been quietly waiting for since the day the Great Collapse ended. He tells us the Council has just handed Earth the opening we needed. Not an ultimatum, an invitation. I ask him to explain, because from where I stand, 7 days feels less like an opportunity and more like a countdown to disaster. He walks to the center of the room, where a massive display shows the current positions of every Earth Fleet division scattered across our territory, some guarding colonies, some patrolling trade routes, most simply waiting, the way they have waited for 20 years. He tells us plainly that Earth was never going to reveal its full strength through a diplomatic letter or a polite ambassador standing behind a podium. Some messages, he says, can only be delivered one way. Peter Lang, standing near the display, asks the question everyone in the room is thinking, but hesitant to say aloud. Are we going to war with the entire Galactic Council? Admiral Voss shakes his head immediately, firmly. No. We are going to answer their summons exactly as requested. We will appear before the Council within 7 days, precisely as they demanded. The only difference is how we choose to arrive. I feel the shift in the room the moment he says it, a kind of electric tension that spreads from officer to officer. Grace Holt straightens beside me, understanding dawning on her face before the Admiral even finishes his sentence. He does not intend to send diplomats aboard a single unarmed shuttle, bowing politely before the Council chamber. He intends to send Earth's answer the way our leaders always planned to deliver it, once the moment was finally right. A fleet, not a small escort. Not a handful of warships meant to intimidate, through implication, an entire armada, built in silence over 20 years, hidden in shipyards, scattered across the asteroid belt and the far side of the outer colonies, technology recovered and refined from the ruins of the war that nearly destroyed us. I ask him directly how many ships we are talking about, because the officers around me deserve a real number, not vague reassurance. His answer lands in the room like a physical weight. 1,000 warships. Every vessel Earth has built since the collapse, gathered in a single formation for the first time in our history, will travel together to the summit system and arrive exactly when the Council least expects a response of that scale. The room stays silent for several seconds, and I find myself doing the math in my head, trying to imagine what a fleet that size actually looks like, assembled in open space. I have commanded ships my entire career, led fleets into difficult engagements, faced enemies who outnumbered us. But nothing in my experience compares to the scale Admiral Voss just described. Grace Holt asks the practical question none of us wants to voice first. She wants to know if this is meant as a threat, because arriving at a diplomatic summit with 1,000 warships could easily be read as a declaration of war rather than an answer to an ultimatum. Red light Admiral Voss's response is measured, careful, deliberate, in a way that tells me he has thought through every possible interpretation long before this meeting began. He explains that the fleet will not fire a single shot unless fired upon first. Our engines, our formation, our presence alone will speak louder than any weapon we could deploy. The goal was never conflict. The goal was recognition, security, and an end to 20 years of being dismissed as irrelevant. I think about Kepler, about the Vantor fleet retreating in confusion after encountering a species they believed had vanished from galactic affairs entirely. I think about the empty chair that has waited at every summit table since Earth's silence began, and slowly, I begin to understand the strategy behind Admiral Voss's plan. We are not preparing for war. We are preparing to make silence impossible ever again. The next several hours pass in a blur of preparation unlike anything I have experienced in my career. Every division commander across Earth's fleet receives the same coded transmission at the same moment, calling their ships home from patrol routes, trade escorts, and colony defense positions. I watch the tactical display as green markers begin converging from every direction. Ships that have spent years scattered across our territory now moving toward a single rendezvous point near the edge of our solar system. Peter Lang works beside me for hours, coordinating docking schedules and fuel transfers with a focus that impresses me given how young he still is. At one point, during a rare quiet moment, he admits quietly that part of him is afraid. Not of the Council, not of the Vantor, but of what it means for humanity to finally reveal everything we have been building in secret. He wonders aloud whether the galaxy will see us as protectors, or as a threat that grew too large while no one was watching. I do not have a perfect answer for him, so I give him an honest one instead. I tell him that fear is reasonable, that anyone standing in his position should feel the weight of what is coming. But I also tell him that 20 years of silence has already cost Earth more than most people realize, in mockery, in dismissal, in colonies nearly lost to species who assumed we were too weak to matter. Whatever risk comes with revealing our strength now, it cannot be worse than another 20 years of being ignored. Grace Holt overhears part of this conversation and adds her own thought, quieter than usual. She says that sometimes the bravest thing a person or a species can do is stop explaining themselves and simply show up. By the time the sun sets over fleet headquarters, the first wave of ships has already reached the rendezvous point, their hulls catching the last light of day before sliding into the dark beyond our atmosphere. I stand on the observation deck with Grace Holt beside me, watching as vessel after vessel takes formation, an assembly larger than anything either of us has ever witnessed in our careers. Admiral Voss joins us on the deck, uncharacteristically quiet as he watches the same view. After a long moment, he tells me something I did not expect. He says that 20 years ago, when Earth first chose silence over summits, many believed it was an act of fear, a retreat from a galaxy that saw us as broken and small. He admits that even within our own government, there were those who doubted the plan, who believed we were hiding rather than preparing. I ask him what changed his mind, back when doubt was strongest. His answer is simple. He says he never doubted it. He always believed that the day would come when Earth would need to answer for its silence, and he wanted to make certain that when that day arrived, our answer would be undeniable. I look out again at the fleet gathering beyond the atmosphere, ships still arriving from every corner of our territory, engines glowing faintly against the darkness of space. Peter Lang joins us on the deck a few minutes later, his expression calmer now than it was earlier, as if the sheer scale of what he has helped organize has settled something uncertain in him. He tells me quietly that he counted the confirmed vessels just before coming up to the deck. 962 ships have already reached formation, with the remaining vessels expected to arrive within the next 2 days, well ahead of the Council's 7-day deadline. I nod, saying nothing for a moment, letting the weight of that number settle over me the same way it clearly has for him. 1,000 warships, built in secret, gathered now for the first time in Earth's history, preparing to cross the distance between our solar system and the summit chamber that has mocked our silence for 2 decades. Admiral Voss speaks again before we leave the deck for the night, his voice steady, almost solemn. He tells us that tomorrow, the final preparations begin. Navigation routes will be finalized, formation patterns confirmed, and every ship commander briefed on the exact protocol for arrival. There will be no aggression, no provocation, no unnecessary display of force beyond simply appearing exactly as we are. I ask him what he expects the Council's reaction to be when 1,000 warships arrive in their system without warning. He considers the question for a long moment before answering, his eyes still fixed on the fleet gathering beyond the viewport. He says he expects panic first, followed by accusations, followed eventually by something the Council has never truly extended to Earth in 20 years. Respect. As the night deepens, and the last ships settle into formation beyond the atmosphere, I find myself thinking about the empty chair that has waited at every summit since Earth's silence began. Tomorrow, preparation continues. Within days, that chair will finally be filled, not by a lone diplomat pleading for recognition, but by a fleet large enough to make ignoring us impossible ever again. Grace Holt speaks one last time before we head back inside, her voice quiet but certain. She says that whatever happens when we arrive, the galaxy will never again mistake Earth's silence for weakness. I agree with her completely, though a part of me still wonders, as I watch the fleet shimmer faintly against the stars, whether the Council is truly prepared for what is about to arrive at their doorstep. The countdown reaches 0, and for a single breathless second, nothing happens at all. Then the entire sky beyond the horizon's viewport ignites at once, 1,000 engines flaring to life in near-perfect unison, turning the dark silence of open space into something that looks almost like a second sunrise. I have watched fleet launches before, small formations of 10 or 20 ships breaking orbit together. Nothing prepared me for this. Grace Holt stands beside me on the bridge, her hand gripping the edge of the console tightly enough that her knuckles have gone pale. She does not say anything for a long moment, simply watching the light spread outward across the formation, ship after ship after ship, falling into position with a precision that took 20 years of quiet preparation to achieve. Peter Lang breaks the silence first, his voice barely above a whisper. He says it looks like the stars themselves are moving. I understand exactly what he means. From this distance, the formation stretches so far in every direction that it becomes difficult to tell where our fleet ends and the actual starfield begins. Red Light Admiral Henry Voss addresses the entire assembled fleet through a single unified channel, his voice calm despite the historic weight of what is happening. He reminds every commander of the mission parameters. We are not traveling to the summit system to start a conflict. We are traveling there to answer a summons, exactly as demanded, and to make certain that Earth is never again treated as an afterthought in galactic affairs. He tells us that our formation will remain disciplined throughout the journey, our weapons will stay passive unless directly threatened, and our conduct will reflect exactly the kind of species we choose to be remembered as. I feel something settle in my chest as I listen to him speak, a mixture of pride and quiet nervousness that I suspect every commander across this fleet is feeling in equal measure. 20 years of silence led to this single moment, 1,000 ships breaking orbit together, carrying with them not a declaration of war, but a declaration of existence. Before we enter transit, I take a few private minutes in my quarters, something I rarely allow myself before a major operation. I open a recorded message waiting for me from my sister back on Earth, sent just hours before departure. Her voice is steady, though I can hear the effort behind that steadiness. She tells me she watched the fleet gather from the observation platform near our childhood home, thousands of engines lighting up the night sky like something out of an old story. She tells me she is proud and frightened, and that she trusts whatever decision led us here, because for the first time in her life, she does not feel like Earth is standing alone against the galaxy. I sit with that message longer than I probably should, given the preparations still waiting for me on the bridge. Then I return to my post, because 20 years of preparation do not pause for one officer's private feelings, no matter how deeply they run. Back on the bridge, Peter Lang approaches me quietly before we enter transit, his earlier nervousness replaced by something steadier, more resolved. He asks me honestly whether I believe we are doing the right thing. I consider the question carefully before answering, because he deserves an honest response rather than a rehearsed one. I tell him that right and wrong rarely appear as clearly as we want them to, especially in decisions this large. What I do believe is that Earth spent 20 years being dismissed, mocked, and treated as irrelevant by a galaxy that never once tried to understand why we chose silence. Whatever risk comes with finally breaking that silence, it is a risk worth taking, because the alternative is decades more of being treated as a footnote in someone else's history. He nods slowly, seeming to accept the answer, and returns to his station just as the transit countdown begins. The jump into transit feels different this time, heavier somehow, though I know that sensation exists only in my mind rather than in the actual mechanics of the drive. 1,000 ships translating into transit space together creates a kind of gravitational ripple that our sensors have never recorded at this scale before. For a brief moment, every screen on the bridge flickers with interference, then stabilizes as the formation settles into the strange, silent rhythm of deep transit travel. Grace Holt monitors the formation integrity from her station, calling out updates every few minutes as ship after ship confirms stable transit alignment. The numbers hold steady, an entire fleet moving together through the emptiness between stars, invisible to any conventional sensor network along the way. The days that follow blur together in the strange, timeless rhythm that deep transit always creates. I move between the bridge, the officers' mess, and brief periods of rest that never quite feel like real sleep. Throughout the fleet, morale remains steady, though I notice subtle signs of tension in nearly everyone I encounter, a certain quietness in conversations that would normally be filled with easy humor. On the third day of transit, our long-range sensors pick up the first sign that our presence has not gone entirely unnoticed. A distant listening post, belonging to a minor species allied loosely with the Galactic Council, registers a brief but massive gravitational disturbance along our transit route before losing the signal entirely. Grace Holt reports the detection to Admiral Voss immediately, and his response confirms what I already suspected. It does not matter. By the time anyone manages to properly identify what they detected, we will already be arriving. I ask him if he is concerned that word might reach the Council early, giving them time to prepare some kind of organized response before we arrive. He tells me he is counting on exactly that. A fleet this size cannot travel in complete secrecy, not across a distance this vast. The goal was never to arrive unnoticed. The goal was to arrive undeniable, appearing with a scale and discipline that no amount of advance warning could adequately prepare the Council to respond to. On the fifth day, tension rises noticeably across the fleet when our sensors detect a second, more direct contact. A Vantor scout vessel, likely still monitoring the aftermath of the Kepler incident, stumbles directly into the edge of our formation's transit wake. The moment their sensors register the sheer size of what they have encountered, the scout vessel reverses course immediately, clearly attempting to flee before we can respond. Grace Holt asks whether we should pursue or disable the vessel before it can report our position and heading to any nearby Vantor command post. Red Light Admiral Voss's answer surprises several officers on the bridge, myself included. "Let them go," he says. "Let them report exactly what they saw. If the Vantor want to warn the galaxy that Earth is approaching the summit system with a fleet larger than anything currently on record, that message serves our purpose just as well as silence would have." I find myself smiling slightly at the strategy behind his decision, a subtle confidence that reflects the same patient calculation that guided Earth's 20 years of quiet preparation. We are not trying to hide our arrival any longer. We are trying to make certain that when we arrive, no one in the galaxy can claim they were not warned. The scout vessel vanishes back into transit space within minutes, and true to Admiral Voss's prediction, panic begins spreading through nearby monitoring networks almost immediately. Grace Holt intercepts fragments of encrypted communication between several minor species allied with the Council, their tone ranging from confusion to open alarm as reports of an unidentified fleet of massive scale continue circulating faster than anyone can properly verify them. By the sixth day, our sensors detect an increased volume of encrypted chatter across nearly every monitored frequency, a clear sign that word of our approach has reached well beyond the Vantor and their immediate allies. Peter Lang reports intercepting fragments referencing our fleet under several different names, most of them wildly exaggerated, some describing us as an invasion force, others insisting we represent an entirely new species that recently conquered humanity and now wears our identity as a disguise. I cannot help but find a strange, quiet amusement in some of these reports, given how far removed they are from the truth. Grace Holt reads through several of the intercepted messages aloud, and even Admiral Voss allows himself a rare, brief laugh at the sheer scale of misinformation already spreading ahead of our arrival. Still, beneath the humor, a serious tension continues building throughout the fleet as we draw closer to the summit system. Peter Lang admits, during a quiet moment on the bridge, that despite everything we have prepared for, he still finds it difficult to imagine what the actual arrival will look like, how the Council will react in the moment their sensors first detect our formation crossing into their system. I tell him honestly that none of us truly know what to expect, myself included. 20 years of preparation account for strategy, formation, and discipline. They cannot fully account for the reaction of an entire galactic council suddenly confronted with the exact thing they spent 2 decades pretending did not exist. On the 7th day, exactly as the council's original deadline demanded, our navigation systems confirm final approach toward the outer edge of the summit system. Admiral Voss addresses the fleet one final time before transit ends, his voice carrying a weight that silences even the quietest background conversations across every linked channel. He reminds every commander, every officer, every crew member throughout the fleet of exactly why we are here, not for conquest, not for revenge against a council that mocked our silence for 20 years. We are here to answer a summons, honestly and directly, and to ensure that Earth's voice in galactic affairs can never again be dismissed or ignored. He tells us that the moment we exit transit, every sensor in the summit system will detect our arrival simultaneously. There will be no gradual reveal, no careful diplomatic introduction. We will simply appear, in full formation, exactly as promised. Grace Holt counts down the final moments before transit exit, her voice steady despite the obvious tension radiating from every station across the bridge. Peter Lang sits rigidly at his console, hands hovering over controls he has rehearsed 100 times, but never under circumstances remotely like this. I take one final look at the formation display, 1,000 ships moving together in perfect, disciplined silence, carrying with them 20 years of quiet preparation and the weight of an entire species finally choosing to be seen. The countdown reaches its final second, and the horizon, along with 999 other vessels representing every corner of Earth's rebuilt strength, drops out of transit at the very edge of the summit system. For a brief, suspended moment, everything remains still. Our sensors sweep across the system ahead of us, confirming what we already expected. The summit chamber sits exactly where galactic records indicated, surrounded by the usual collection of diplomatic vessels, security escorts, and observation platforms belonging to dozens of species across the galaxy. Then, almost simultaneously, alarms begin flashing across countless foreign communication channels our sensors are able to intercept. Grace Holt reports a sudden, massive spike in encrypted traffic throughout the system, ships scrambling into defensive positions, diplomatic vessels broadcasting frantic queries to anyone who might explain what has just appeared at the edge of their carefully controlled meeting space. Peter Lang exhales slowly beside me, his voice quiet but steady. He says we are finally here. I nod, watching the summit system spread out before us on the display, aware that somewhere within that distant chamber, a council that has spent 20 years leaving an empty chair for humanity is about to discover exactly what filled it. Admiral Voss's voice comes through one final time before we begin our approach, calm, measured, and absolutely certain. "Hold formation," he says. "Say nothing yet. Let them see us first." And so we wait, 1,000 warships suspended at the edge of a system that has never once truly believed Earth capable of arriving like this, silent, disciplined, and impossible to ignore any longer. The summit chamber, when its live feed reaches our bridge, looks nothing like the calm, orderly meeting space I imagined during years of intelligence briefings. Delegates from dozens of species move across the chamber floor in obvious disorder, voices overlapping in a dozen different languages as translators struggle to keep pace with the panic spreading through the room. I watch the feed alongside Grace Holt, both of us silent as the scale of the reaction becomes clear. The council speaker, the same voice that delivered Earth's ultimatum only days earlier, attempts to restore order from the central podium, though even her composure seems to waver as reports continue flooding in from sensor stations throughout the system. She demands clarification from her own security officers, asking how a fleet of this size crossed such a vast distance without any advanced detection. No one on the chamber floor has an answer for her, because the honest answer is one none of them are prepared to accept. Earth simply built something they never believed we were capable of building, and kept it hidden until the exact moment we chose to reveal it. Admiral Henry Voss opens a direct channel to the summit chamber, his image appearing on the central display above the podium for every delegate to see. The room falls into a tense, uneasy silence as he begins speaking, his voice calm, despite addressing an audience that just days ago labeled Earth a rogue territory unworthy of protection. He begins simply, without apology, without the defensive posture I suspect many delegates expected. He reminds the council that Earth received their summons exactly 7 days ago, demanding our appearance before this chamber to explain our absence from galactic affairs and our use of force against the Vantor near Kepler. He tells them that Earth has honored that summons precisely as requested. We have arrived, exactly as demanded, within the deadline given. Several delegates immediately begin objecting, their translated voices overlapping in accusation. One representative, from a species I recognize as long-standing allies of the Vantor, demands to know why a diplomatic summons was answered with an armed fleet rather than a diplomatic envoy. Admiral Voss allows the objection to finish completely before responding, his patience deliberate rather than passive. He explains that Earth's silence over the past 20 years was never born from weakness or fear, despite what this council chose to believe. It was born from necessity, following a war that nearly destroyed our entire species, one that occurred largely outside galactic awareness because Earth chose to rebuild quietly rather than beg for assistance from a council that, at the time, showed little interest in our survival. The chamber grows quieter as he continues, several delegates exchanging uncertain glances as the weight of his words settles over the room. He tells them plainly that the fleet gathered outside their system tonight represents 20 years of that quiet rebuilding, and its presence here is not a declaration of war, but a demonstration of exactly what silence can produce when a species chooses patience over desperation. Grace Holt watches the feed beside me, her expression tightening as the Vantor representative finally speaks, his tone sharp and accusatory. He demands that Earth answer for what he calls an unprovoked attack against Vantor forces near Kepler, insisting that our fleet's presence here proves nothing except that Earth has become a reckless, aggressive threat that the Council must address immediately. I feel my jaw tighten at the accusation, though I remain silent, trusting Admiral Voss to handle the moment with the same discipline that guided every decision throughout this entire operation. His response comes without hesitation. He tells the chamber that Earth did not attack an innocent Vantor exploration vessel near Kepler. We responded to an armed Vantor fleet descending toward an inhabited human colony without warning, without diplomatic contact and without any legal claim to the territory they attempted to occupy. He then does something that visibly shifts the tone of the entire chamber. He releases, in full view of every delegate present, the intelligence Earth's fleet gathered regarding the Vantor's activity over the past several years. The display above the podium fills with data our intelligence officers spent months compiling quietly, records of numerous small, undefended colonies across the outer galaxy absorbed by Vantor forces under circumstances remarkably similar to Kepler, always timed to moments when a world appeared weak, distracted, or unprotected by any recognized fleet presence. The chamber erupts into a different kind of noise entirely, delegates from several smaller species reacting with visible shock as they recognize colonies belonging to their own territories among the records displayed. One delegate, representing a small agricultural world near the outer rim, stands abruptly, demanding to know why this information was never shared with the Council previously. Admiral Voss answers calmly, explaining that Earth only recently completed the intelligence gathering necessary to confirm the full scope of the Vantor's expansion pattern, precisely because our silence over the past 20 years allowed us the freedom to observe without drawing unwanted attention. He adds, without any trace of satisfaction in his tone, that had Earth attended these summits as expected, our ability to quietly monitor this exact threat would likely have been compromised far earlier. The Vantor representative attempts to object again, but his voice now carries far less confidence than it did moments earlier, as delegates across the chamber begin murmuring among themselves, several clearly reconsidering their earlier hostility toward Earth's presence. The Council speaker finally regains enough control of the room to address Admiral Voss directly, her tone noticeably more measured than before. She asks what Earth intends to do with the fleet currently stationed at the edge of their system, given the obvious tension its presence has created throughout the chamber. Admiral Voss's answer is simple, direct, and delivered without hesitation. Our fleet will remain exactly where it is, holding position, until this Council formally acknowledges Earth's place among recognized galactic species, with full protection under the same laws currently used to protect every other member represented in this chamber. He adds that Earth has no interest in conflict, no desire for conquest, and no intention of using this fleet for anything beyond the defense of our people and our territory, exactly as any other species represented here would expect for themselves. The room falls into a heavy silence following his statement, delegates glancing between each other, clearly weighing the implications of what has just been proposed. The Vantor representative attempts one final objection, insisting that Earth cannot simply demand recognition through intimidation, threatening consequences if the Council allows what he calls coercion to dictate galactic policy. It is at this moment that Grace Holt receives an urgent censor report, one she relays to me immediately before I forward it directly to Admiral Voss through our private channel. A secondary Vantor fleet, previously undetected, has been quietly maneuvering toward the summit system's outer boundary over the past several hours, clearly positioned to intervene should the Council side against Vantor interests during this exact confrontation. I watch Admiral Voss's expression shift slightly as he receives the same information, though his composure never fully breaks. He addresses the chamber once more, his tone now carrying a subtle edge of warning beneath its calm exterior. He informs the Council, and every delegate present, that Earth's sensors have just detected a second Vantor fleet approaching the system's boundary, positioned in a manner that suggests preparation for confrontation rather than diplomatic observation. The chamber reacts immediately, delegates turning toward the Vantor representative with open suspicion, several demanding an explanation for a fleet movement that was never disclosed to the Council prior to this meeting. The Vantor representative attempts to downplay the report, insisting it represents nothing more than a routine patrol unrelated to the current proceedings. But the timing proves impossible to explain away convincingly, and I can see, even through the limited feed available to our bridge, the shift in how the rest of the chamber now regards him. Admiral Voss uses the moment precisely as I suspect he planned to from the very beginning of this confrontation. He informs the Council that Earth's fleet, currently holding position at the system's edge, is more than capable of addressing any attempt at aggression, whether directed at Earth or at this Council chamber itself. He makes clear, however, that Earth has no intention of initiating conflict and that our fleet will remain passive unless directly threatened. The Council speaker, visibly shaken by the sudden revelation of a second Vantor fleet, orders an immediate security response, directing several Allied battle groups already present in the system to intercept and identify the approaching vessels before they can advance any further. I watch the tactical display alongside Grace Holt as several Council-aligned ships move to intercept the Vantor fleet, and for a tense series of minutes, the entire bridge holds its breath, uncertain whether this confrontation will resolve peacefully or spiral into the exact conflict Earth spent 20 years trying to avoid. The Vantor fleet, upon realizing they have been detected and that Earth's massive formation remains ready to respond should the Council request assistance, begins a slow, reluctant retreat back toward their own territory. The tension across the bridge breaks slightly as Grace Holt confirms their withdrawal, though the underlying uncertainty of the moment lingers a while longer before finally settling. Back in the summit chamber, the Council speaker addresses Admiral Voss once more, her tone now carrying a weight of genuine consideration rather than the dismissive authority present during earlier summits Earth chose not to attend. She acknowledges, openly and before the entire assembled Council, that Earth's absence over the past 20 years appears to have been far more calculated and far less careless than previously assumed. Admiral Voss responds with the same calm restraint he has maintained throughout the entire exchange. He tells her simply that Earth never sought conflict with this Council, nor with any species represented within it. We sought only the ability to rebuild in peace, following a war that nearly ended us, and the recognition that our right to defend our people should never have required an apology in the first place. The chamber falls into a long, contemplative silence following his words, delegates from dozens of worlds exchanging quiet glances, clearly reconsidering everything they believed about Earth leading into this confrontation. I watch the feed closely, aware that whatever happens in the next few moments will likely determine the shape of humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy for decades to come. The Council speaker finally turns back toward Admiral Voss, her expression settling into something closer to respect than the wary suspicion she carried at the start of this exchange. She informs him that the Council will require time to properly deliberate Earth's formal recognition, though she acknowledges, before every delegate present, that tonight's events have made one thing undeniably clear. Earth's silence was never a sign of weakness, and any future summit table that leaves an empty chair for humanity does so entirely at the galaxy's own risk. 3 days pass before the Council delivers its final decision, and every one of those days feels longer than the entire journey it took to reach this system. Our fleet remains in formation at the edge of the summit space, disciplined and patient, exactly as Admiral Voss ordered from the very first moment we arrived. I spend most of those days on the bridge, monitoring communications, watching diplomatic traffic shift gradually from panic to cautious negotiation among the delegates still processing what our arrival truly meant. Grace Holt spends much of that time beside me, occasionally sharing fragments of intercepted chatter that reveal just how thoroughly Earth's reputation has changed across the galaxy in the span of a single confrontation. Species who once dismissed us as irrelevant now debate our capabilities with open concern. Smaller worlds who suffered quietly under Vantor expansion begin reaching out through unofficial channels, asking whether Earth might be willing to extend some form of protection now that our strength has been revealed so clearly. Peter Lang, still adjusting to the sheer scale of everything that has happened since Kepler, admits to me during one of these quiet moments that he never imagined humanity's first true introduction to the wider galaxy would happen this way. He expected, if it ever happened at all, a slow, careful process of diplomacy and gradual trust building. Instead, he says, We introduced ourselves with 1,000 ships and complete silence, and somehow, that spoke louder than any words could have. I tell him honestly that I share some of that same disbelief, though I have come to see the wisdom behind Admiral Voss's long patience. 20 years of silence allowed Earth to observe the galaxy without ever revealing our own weaknesses in return. It allowed us to gather intelligence on threats like the Vantor long before anyone realized we were watching. And it allowed us, when the moment finally came, to answer an ultimatum not with apology, but with undeniable proof of exactly what we had quietly become. On the fourth day, the council speaker requests a formal audience with Admiral Voss, and this time, the tone of the request carries none of the cold authority present in the original ultimatum that brought us here. Grace Holt relays the message to me the moment it arrives, and I notice a subtle shift in her expression, something closer to quiet hope than the tension that has defined most of this mission. Admiral Voss accepts the audience immediately, and I watch the exchange unfold from the bridge alongside my crew, all of us silent as the council speaker addresses him directly, for what feels like the first time, as something closer to an equal rather than a distant, dismissive authority. She begins by acknowledging, formally and before a recorded session that will be shared across every summit archive in galactic history, that Earth's absence from the Council over the past 20 years has been thoroughly misunderstood. She admits that the Vantor's activities near Kepler and several other undefended colonies represent exactly the kind of quiet expansion the Council failed to properly monitor, and that Earth's intelligence, however unconventional in its gathering, exposed a threat that could have grown significantly worse had it remained unaddressed. Admiral Voss listens without interruption, his expression calm but attentive, the same composure he has carried through every moment of this entire mission. When she finishes, he responds simply, without any trace of triumph in his tone. He tells her that Earth never sought vindication through this confrontation. We sought only the right to defend our people without requiring permission from a council that for 20 years treated our survival as someone else's concern rather than a shared responsibility among neighboring worlds. The council speaker nods slowly and then delivers the announcement that every officer aboard our fleet has been waiting to hear since this mission began. By unanimous vote among the delegates present, Earth is formally recognized as a full member of the Galactic Council, granted the same protections, responsibilities, and standing extended to every other species represented within these summit halls. The bridge erupts into quiet, restrained celebration the moment the announcement concludes, officers exchanging relieved smiles and quiet words of congratulations, though the overall mood remains tempered by the seriousness of everything it took to reach this moment. Grace Holt turns to me, her eyes carrying a mixture of pride and quiet exhaustion after days of sustained tension finally beginning to ease. Peter Lang approaches shortly after, his earlier uncertainty replaced by something steadier, more settled. He tells me that he keeps thinking about the empty chair the Council always reserved for humanity during every summit we chose not to attend. He wonders aloud what it must have looked like tonight, finally filled, not by a single representative pleading for recognition, but by an entire fleet standing quietly at the edge of the system, patient and undeniable. I tell him I imagine it looked exactly like 20 years of preparation finally paying off. Over the following days, as our fleet begins the slow process of formal introduction to the wider galactic community, I find myself reflecting often on everything that led to this moment, the quiet decades of rebuilding after the collapse. The shipyards hidden across the asteroid belt, working in silence while the rest of the galaxy assumed Earth had simply vanished from relevance. The small, patient decisions made by leaders like Admiral Voss, who understood that some answers require time, discipline, and the willingness to endure ridicule until the moment finally arrives to respond. Grace Holt and I spend one quiet evening on the observation deck of the Horizon, watching as diplomatic shuttles from dozens of newly curious species approach our fleet, requesting formal introductions and, in several cases, quiet offers of trade and cooperation that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. She tells me she keeps thinking about how close Earth came to losing Kepler entirely, how easily the Vantor's plan could have succeeded had our silence lasted even a few months longer. I share that same thought often, though I try to focus more on what comes next rather than what nearly happened. Earth's seat at the summit table is no longer empty, and the responsibility that comes with that seat is something none of us fully understand yet. Protecting our own people was simple enough to justify. Extending that same protection to smaller worlds who reached out during our confrontation with the Council raises questions our leadership will need to answer carefully in the months ahead. Admiral Voss addresses the fleet one final time before beginning preparations for our eventual return to Earth, his voice carrying the same steady composure that guided us through every stage of this mission. He tells us that today marks not an ending, but a beginning, one far more complicated than the quiet 20 years that preceded it. Earth now stands recognized among the wider galaxy, and with that recognition comes obligations we never had to consider while operating in isolation. He reminds every officer present that the Vantor, though publicly humiliated during the Council session, remain a significant power within galactic affairs, and their resentment toward Earth's sudden rise will not simply disappear because of one confrontation. Other species, some genuinely curious, others deeply suspicious of Earth's rapid emergence, will require careful diplomacy in the months and years ahead. The fleet that arrived here in silence and discipline will need to demonstrate that same restraint again and again as Earth navigates a role in galactic affairs we spent 20 years avoiding entirely. I take his words seriously, understanding that the difficult work of true integration into galactic society is only beginning, regardless of how decisively our arrival here settled the immediate crisis. Still, standing on the observation deck as our fleet slowly begins preparing for departure, I allow myself a quiet moment of genuine satisfaction, something I have not permitted myself since this entire mission began. Peter Lang joins me for one final conversation before departure preparations pull him back to his station, his expression calmer now than at any point since Kepler first appeared on our sensors. He tells me he finally understands what Admiral Voss meant, days ago, when he described our silence as patience rather than fear. He says that watching the Council chamber shift from dismissal to genuine respect taught him something about restraint he suspects he will carry with him for the rest of his career. I tell him honestly that I learned something similar throughout this mission, something I suspect every officer aboard this fleet now understands in a way we did not before departure. Strength, revealed too early, invites conflict before a species is ready to withstand it. Strength, revealed at exactly the right moment, with discipline and clear purpose, becomes something far more valuable than any weapon alone could achieve: respect. Grace Holt joins us for the final moments before our fleet begins its slow withdrawal from the summit system, her gaze drifting toward the distant chamber where, for the first time in 20 years, a chair reserved for Earth's representative finally sits filled rather than empty. She tells me quietly that she wonders what the galaxy will look like a decade from now, with Earth firmly established as a recognized member of this council rather than the quiet, mysterious absence we represented for so long. I do not have a certain answer for her, though I find myself hopeful rather than anxious about whatever comes next. Earth spent 20 years being underestimated, mocked, and dismissed by a galaxy that assumed our silence meant weakness. Tonight, and in the days that led us here, we proved decisively that patience, discipline, and quiet preparation can accomplish what desperate pleading never could. As our fleet finally begins its slow, disciplined withdrawal from the summit system, engines glowing softly against the endless dark of space, I find myself thinking one last time about that empty chair, reserved faithfully at every summit for for 20 long years, despite Earth's continued absence. Tonight, it finally holds meaning, not because we begged for a place at that table, but because we arrived exactly as we always intended to, quiet and patient until the precise moment silence was no longer the answer the galaxy needed from us. 1,000 warships carried us here, disciplined and unwavering, without firing a single shot in anger throughout this entire confrontation. And as I watch our formation settle into its return course toward Earth, I understand, with a certainty I did not fully possess before this mission began, that the empty chair the galaxy once mocked us for ignoring will never sit empty again, not while humanity remains willing to answer, exactly as we did tonight, with quiet strength instead of desperate words.